You're listening to LeaderCast, episode 166. Welcome to LeaderCast, Transforming Missions podcast with Tim Bias and Sarah Thomas, providing you with insights and resources you need to lead a movement of Jesus followers.
We've met a lot of people, hundreds of people, into the thousands of people, like the two of you have. Many of those people I remember, but some I don't. But Rachel and I have been together, and we have history together, and we will be together no matter where God leads us. So we need to invest in those relationships that anchor our lives.
Today we're having a conversation with Dennis Miller. We talk about the essential relationships for Christian leaders. We talk about relationships that sometimes we take for granted and those that are absolutely necessary as we continue to lead and live as followers of Jesus. We also have a little conversation about developing relationships beyond the church and the people who mentor us through difficult times. As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode along with the questions and anything that we mention here on this episode at transformingmission.org/podcast. And you're looking for episode 166. Without any further wait, here's our conversation with Dennis Miller.
Well, welcome, Dennis, to LeaderCast.
Good morning.
Will you tell us something about who you are and what you do to get paid?
Well, thank you, Sarah and Tim, for the opportunity to be part of today's discussion. And I'm delighted to be with you today. Grateful for your work in making disciples of Jesus. And let me say before I share more about myself that I'm just grateful for Transforming Mission. It's been a wonderful resource for our district in the Foothills and throughout the conference. So thank you for being you. Well, who am I? The answer to that question is one that I've been attempting to understand and discover my entire life. But this is what I know today. I'm a child of God by creation as well as redemption. I'm a disciple of Jesus. He's my life, my first love. He is my Savior and Lord, and I'm an ambassador of Christ like the both of you. And that should be a given, and it is a given, but yet on the other hand, I don't take it for granted. I'm humbled by God's call upon my life and the opportunity to serve. On a more personal level, I'm the son of Bill and Nancy Miller from Zanesville. I'm the husband of Rachel, who is an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church. We met in seminary, and this year we will celebrate our 27th year of marriage. I'm an elder in the United Methodist Church. This year marks my 30th year of being under appointment in the West Ohio Conference. And finally, I guess I'll say, because we're not defined solely by our occupation, that I'm an adventurous motorcyclist. I've ridden over 250,000 miles over the last several years. I've been riding since I've been 14 years old. I've crisscrossed the nation many times, over a dozen times, and ridden from Columbus to Alaska 4 times. So what that says about me is I love adventure, I love challenge, and I love the open road. So that's me.
So, Dennis, what do you get paid to do?
I'm serving in my 7th year as superintendent of the Foothills District in the West Ohio Conference of the United Methodist Church. The district consists of 160 congregations spread throughout 10 counties in southeastern Ohio. For those listening and not familiar with the regions of Ohio, this is the Appalachian country, hill country of the Buckeye State. So this is also where I'm from. This is my home district. In fact, I'm the district superintendent of my home church and of my parents and my sister. So in the district, I wear many hats, like you do, Tim. I'm the chief missional strategist of the district. I'm a pastor to pastor. I'm a coach, mediator, and cheerleader and servant.
And real estate agent.
And real estate agent, that's right. Although I never thought that'd be part of my call. The glory of God.
Part of what we do, as you know, Dennis, with LeaderCast is try to provide insights and resources for courageous leaders. So what does being a courageous leader mean to you?
I'm learning that every day, but being a courageous leader right now for me means staying focused on the mission of the church. A courageous leader makes tough decisions to do what's right, to lead others in fulfilling that mission. As a church leader, it's easy for us to be pulled away in different directions, depending upon the latest trends or the loudest voices. So a courageous leader lives out their values moment by moment. And that takes a lot of courage. Courageous leaders don't allow the circumstances to dictate the mission, although certainly they rise to the challenge of adapting their methods to the present circumstances, but it's always to fulfill the mission. So although the methods may change and how we go about leading, the mission doesn't, and a courageous leader focuses on that.
So one of the questions we talk about, Sarah and I talk about, of what do courageous leaders need to know, do, or understand? And as we narrow down our conversation today, we know that one of those characteristics, or what we need to understand, is relationships. So maybe we'll start our conversation with this. What relationships are important for leaders?
Well, there are many different types of relationships that all leaders have, and I want to speak to those. I first want to say just some general thoughts about relationships, because there's a well-known saying in our culture, it's lonely at the top, but I want to say it shouldn't be like that. And the truth is that all of us have been created for interpersonal relationships, right? I mean, think about Jesus, the greatest leader of all time. He didn't spend the majority of his time with the masses, just speaking with them. He gathered around himself individuals, 12 guys and a group of women, and he said, let's do life together. Jesus hung out with them, he ate with them, he taught them, he modeled life for them, he discipled them, and he even had a smaller group within that group of Peter, James, and John. And that's the model that we see of other great leaders in the Bible. We see that in the Apostle Paul. He had a group. He gathered around himself Titus and Barnabas and Silas and Lydia and Timothy and John Mark and Epaphroditus, because he knew he couldn't do and live life alone. So relational ministry is not leadership. Our relationships are essential to life. In fact, relational leadership is ineffective, because if we don't have people that we're influencing, then we're just, as John Maxwell says, out taking a walk. We're really not leading anyone. So I've identified at least 4 that I think are essential for leaders, but there are many, many more. But certainly for a Christian leader, our relationship with the Lord should be first, always. And it seems like a given, but it's something that we always need to put before anything else. It requires spending time. It takes effort, spending time with God in prayer. It takes time with getting to know God as God reveals God's plan for our lives. And it's in God's presence I realize who I truly am, that I'm not simply a human doing. I'm not defined by what I do, but I'm a human being. And I discover that more and more when I'm in the presence of God. A few years ago, and it's been nearly 10 now, I received a little sign at Adam Hamilton's leadership conference that hangs in my shower. And those who attended the conference all received this, and I still have it. And I read it every morning, and it just reminds me who I am. And I have it right here in my hand, and I wanted to share it with you. And I often pray this prayer: Lord, as I enter the water to bathe, I remember my baptism. Wash me by your grace. Fill me with your spirit. Renew my soul. I pray that I might live as your child today and honor you in all that I do. When I think of this, I am reminded that I'm not defined by what I do in the moment, but who I am in God. It was Martin Luther, great reformer, when he faced a moment of stress, he'd reach up with his right hand, touch his forehead, make the sign of the cross, and he'd say, I am baptized. My God is a jealous God, and he will not let me go. I am baptized. And it's essential for us as leaders to know that we're more than just the sum of what we're doing, but we are who God has created us to be. And so our relationship with the Lord is to be before anything else. I would say that's number one.
And you've given us a wonderful reminder Dennis, of a very simple prayer. And I received one of those tags too. My little string broke many years ago, and
I still have it here.
and so I don't have it anymore, but I remember that, and it's a simple reminder of how we nurture that relationship with God. And so it doesn't have to always be a complex thing that we do. Sometimes it's the simple prayers that are prayed over and over and over again that remind us of that relationship and help us to invest in that relationship. And at other times, there is more time given. So thank you for that.
And there are times when we fail as leaders and we know it. When we get alone, we realize we're the one to blame, that we just messed up. And it's good to be reminded that even in the midst of all that, we're not totally defined by that one incident, but God looks at us in a greater light.
Yeah.
I also think certainly family relationships would be right there at the top. I tell my pastors that I oversee and partner with that they're probably not going to be the pastor of a particular congregation their entire life, but if they're married, they'll be husband or wife to their spouse. They're not always going to be the pastor of the particular church that they're serving, but if they're a parent, will always be a dad or a mom. Several years ago, I read a little book by a PK, a pastor's kid, and I don't remember the book because it's been years now, where he talked about how he resented the church because the church always took first priority. He talked about going on family vacations where his father was a pastor and he would be called back for a funeral. And this happened more than once. And he said, not only did my father have to go back and his vacation was ruined, but he said our family's vacation was ruined as well. And it was a constant reminder that, our family is always going to be with us through transition. I think about my wife, Rachel. We've moved 5 times, and yet we've met a lot of people, hundreds of people, into the thousands of people, like the two of you have. Many of those people I remember, but some I don't. But Rachel and I have been together. We have history together, and we will be together no matter where God leads us. So we need to invest in those relationships that anchor our lives, and also cultivate that to be a person and leader of integrity. We want to live out our faith at home. I want my wife to see the same guy at home that she sees standing on the stage in the pulpit. And sometimes I fail at that. I'm not proud of that, but I want her to be able in her heart, not just by her words, to say, when a close friend asks, now, does he live that way at home? She can say, well, that's who he is. So it's one thing for a leader to practice what they preach, but it's another thing to preach what they practice. See the difference? to live out your everyday faith. So that family relationship is essential. And that's why I think in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul talks about having your family in order, even in the midst of our imperfections that we all have, so we can oversee and lead in a godly way in the church.
Usually it's our family that's pretty good at pointing out those imperfections too.
Yeah. And they're the ones we have to be real with, right? Because they know us. Absolutely. So that's a key relationship. And again, in the midst of transitions, we know it's our family that will transition with us, that our journey's not solo, that it'll be those individuals that will walk with us through all seasons of life. I would also add then that every leader needs strong relationships that are personal relationships that are equal in a sense outside of the church. These could be encouraging relationships or sharpening relationships based upon that verse from Proverbs 27, as iron sharpens irons, we sharpen one another's. And leaders need people who will sharpen and challenge them, provide spiritual accountability, and encourage them in spiritual growth that could bring insight. That's one of the things I appreciate about being on a cabinet team is that we're all different. And Tim, you're part of that team. But we learn from each other. We think differently. And sometimes it's easy for us as leaders to get closed in just in very small circles. But in this team that I'm part of now, we come from different backgrounds. We have different experiences. We see life in a different way. And yet we bring it all to the table. And that strengthens and it helps us in the midst of blind spots as well. In my own life, I've been blessed to have another elder in the conference that we have been friends since we were children. And in Zanesville, it's Brian Law. Many people in the West High Conference would know Brian Law. We've walked together over the years through junior high and high school. And he has been a person that can call me out in times that I've needed to be challenged, when I've needed to take the blame for a bad decision. He's a person that I trust to have my back, to love me, to pray for me, to support me. Those kind of relationships, they take time to develop, right? So they don't happen overnight. But I think that they're essential for life, and they're more valuable than gold.
So I feel like we could stop the podcast right there and just say to folks, okay, just walk through that. How are you doing with those relationships that Dennis just named? So we're not going to stop the podcast, but I am going to ask you that. How are you doing with those relationships? And take the time, whether it's out, you're going for a walk or you're driving somewhere, to consider that. And who are the people in your life that you might need to pick up the phone and make a phone call to, or find a time on your calendar that you're going to spend time with. And that time on the calendar might be time with God. We can get into busy. I think that has been one of the gifts of this pandemic, is that there has been less busyness, and for some there's been more margin, and it's been an absolute gift. Now, I know for our pastors listening, they're laughing at me even hearing say that, because most of our pastors are working triple time trying to get everything done that they need to get done because of the adaptations. I recognize that, folks. Thank you for that, Dennis.
And again, I mentioned that takes time to develop, and it takes a risk. You have to make an effort, and those things just don't happen. There's work to be done. Now, for me, I've been blessed to have that childhood friend, but for others, you may have to look for that. And maybe it's relationships outside of the church. When you're leading a local church, relationships can be rich, but also they're different because they're not always equal. If you're a leader, you're in a powerful position, and people look to you perhaps in a different way. So if you can find someone outside of the church that you can just be yourself, be comfortable sharing, and be vulnerable, there's no shame when there's vulnerability, when you know that you got each other's backs and that you're bearing one another's burdens.
So you have Brian that you've done that with, but how have you done that in the past in churches that you've served?
I don't think you can force relationships. They happen over time if you put yourself in a space to allow them to grow. So for me, I am a motorcyclist, and some of my closest friends over the years have been outside of the church. Now, some through those friendships, as they've grown, have developed into something more. Some of those people have become believers, but others are still not believers. But we have common ground, which is adventure, camping, motorcyclists. So those relationships are rich to me. First of all, they're outside the church. One thing I've learned is often within the walls of the church, within the stained glass windows, people complain a lot about the church, inside the church, outside the church. Here's the good news. They just don't care. They're living life. But then you can get the pulse of what's really going on in the world through the eyes and lens of people. So for me, it's been in that world. And I've met the most interesting people. Now, of course, they know I'm a preacher over time. They soon find that out. And as long as they quickly discover that I'm not a threat, they can be real. And again, it doesn't happen overnight. As a pastor, around non-believers, some people are uncomfortable, others aren't. They're just who they are. But as I love on them and respect them, that relationship grows. So I don't think you can force those kind of relationships. But I'd say to people who are looking for relationships in and out of the church, if it's out of the church, look for common ground. Perhaps you enjoy gardening or fishing, dining. My wife, Rachel, she, over the years, struggling with friendships, especially since I'm a district superintendent and we don't have a local church. She's really struggled here. And so she got involved in a fitness running club. And some of her closest friends today are out of that. Now, most of these ladies are part of other churches. Some don't go to church at this time, but they have brought life to her.
You've identified 4 groups of people, not all of them are groups, 4 different groups and individuals that we need to be in relationship with. And yet we all know the world that we live in as pastors, and you've pointed to this too. There's always a moment of transition that can happen. Some of those transitions we plan for. They happen in marriages. They happen when you're looking for a new job. They happen when you get to the end of school and you graduate. And then other transitions sometimes are sudden and unexpected, and sometimes not even wanted. And I'm referring to the death of a loved one. We experience a mixed bag when it comes to a new appointment. Sometimes we're anticipating that, sometimes we're not, and yet it's the reality. All of that to say, as you have been a leader in different contexts, you've experienced those transitions. What relationships have been important for you or for other leaders, however you want to answer the question, experiencing transitions?
I think there are several. One would be those that mentor me, that pastor me. So in the past 7 years, although he's been my supervisor, he's been my pastor, Bishop Palmer, that I've looked to him and been pretty open and transparent in some of my feelings, and he's counseled me. And so that's needed because we all need someone that give us spiritual guidance and direction, someone that we respect, someone that we feel is God's voice to our hearts. And I think we all need a person in our life to do that. Also is why we need to cultivate these relationships that I mentioned, family and friends in and outside of the church and colleagues that we can lean on in the midst of transitions, because even though we may change location or occupation, those relationships that we've had ongoing over the years, they bring us stability in the midst of change. Often it's when we're in times of turmoil too, that those are the people that we know love us and that we're anchored to. If we are in a situation where, we just have a crisis in our life, we feel that we're all alone, we have individuals that are going to be there, that they're not going to be moved by, the winds that are shifting around us. And so our journey's not solo.
I love what you pointed to in terms of relationships providing stability. You've been with people who are experiencing transitions. As a leader, what's been necessary for you to help people through those transitions? You're not experiencing it, mm-hmm. but you're their leader. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of marriage, graduation, mm-hmm. new job, people are retiring. Who did you need to be in that moment as a leader mm-hmm. to help people through transitions?
Mm-hmm. I think a good leader understands the gift of presence well, that in life transitions, it's more about just who we are and what we've been in the past and what we'll continue to be than what we say to them in the moment. I think that we can be a life giver to them, a source of strength versus a person that drains life. And all of us have those kind of relationships, right? Even in our own lives, we have people that we give life to, but they drain life out of us. But they're important relationships, whether we're a caregiver or a servant to them. But then we have people that when we're around, we're energized. maybe not just what they say or do for us, but who they are. And we want to be those kind of people to others as well. Some of that's just the ministry of presence, that we show up and that we're with them to hold their hand when we're able in post-COVID days.
You've got a real interest in history, and you put things in a historical context, and you do that really well. How has that study helped you develop relationships, or is there any relationship grown out of that kind of historical context that has allowed you to become more who you're supposed to be?
I understand your question. I think some of these relationships that I've developed have helped me through some challenging times and maybe a better leader. One example would be when I was 33 years old, I became the senior pastor of Grace United Methodist Church in Piqua, which is a well-known church in our conference. Now, they had just moved into a facility on 13 acres adjacent from the high school. And within my first 18 months, our average attendance grew from about 375 to over 500 per Sunday. And I was on cloud nine. I was the youngest senior pastor in the history of the congregation, one of the youngest pastors in the conference in a large church. My ego was inflated. I was EGO and edging God out. But I quickly faced leadership challenges that, to be honest, Tim and Sarah, I wasn't prepared for. I'd never been put in this position. I didn't learn these leadership keys in seminary. And although I have fond memories of my time in Piqua, and we actually ended up growing after that for the next 5 years, about 550. So we slowed down and plateaued. In hindsight, I realized I needed a coach. I needed a mentor to guide me through those transitions because I didn't understand change. For me, it was all top down. This is what you do. And the people just love you and listen. But through change, just all the struggle, the human dynamics that were going on. And so what happened, though, is that I connected with two other pastors who were a little older than me at the time, still young pastors, but they had been there. They had traveled that road. In fact, some of the people in our conference would know them was Chris Heckerman and Bill Lyle. Bill was over at Greenville, and Chris at the time was at Sydney First. And they sat down with me, and I met with their leadership team and brought my leadership team from Piqua over there. And we began to learn what it means to be an effective team together and to work through transitions. So 20 years later, and it's been 20 years now, I realized I could have avoided many of the pitfalls of leading a congregation through several seasons of growth and change if I would have had people inside and outside of the church that would partner with me in a collaborative way. So we would have congregational buy-in that would last longer than the moment. So I always look back to that time, still a positive time in my life, but realize it was through the gift of others, Bill and Chris, and then my leadership team, that we're able to survive and to move through that. I think a lot of leaders are just simply over their head. They've never been trained or taught, or maybe they've heard a podcast or read a book. But to understand the human dynamics of change and all that's going on there, we can't do it alone. We have to do it together.
So there's some self-awareness, and there's also some vulnerability, and at the place of connecting with people who can help you be the person you're supposed to be. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go back, Dennis, if we can, to something that you brought up a couple of times. And that's about your love of motorcycling and the relationships that have developed from that. As I think about the world that we're living in, knowing the number of people who have said, I'm not a person of faith.
Mm-hmm.
You have something that is very important to you, that you naturally build relationships with people who are outside the church. Some of them absolutely are inside the church too, but some of them are outside. And I'm saying that because I'm always kind of in awe when I have conversations with leaders in the church and with faithful folks that they don't have relationships with anyone who is not a believer. So my question for you in that is, what wisdom can you offer to folks about developing relationships with people that are not a part of the church?
I think we need to first establish common ground. You see that with the Apostle Paul in Acts chapter 17 when he went to Athens, and he established common ground on an understanding that they had in the moment and appealed to them in that way. So whatever it might be, life is, in a holistic way, is more than just a sermon on Sunday morning. We live life and have different interests and passions. And in the motorcycling world, it's been easy for me to connect with people with a certain passion, and a friendship grows, not because I'm trying to evangelize them. I mean, my heart as a pastor, I would like them to see them connect with God. But initially, that's not the reason that we're connecting. We're connecting over a common love for the outdoors, for travel, for the bike itself. And then we allow things naturally to take place through friendships. And I think that if you approach it that way, of just loving people and starting with where they're at instead of where you're at, then those relationships can come about. If you force something, it just doesn't happen.
Thank you. It sounds so simple, and yet I know too many people that needed to hear what you just said. So thank you.
And that passion has also opened up doors for friendships around the country. So, for instance, I have a very close friend that developed out of the common passion, who is a Christian leader in a Midwestern state. And so now I can call him and say, we need to have a fireside chat as if we're together at a campsite in British Columbia, which we have been together alone. But in our mind, we can say, let's have a British Columbia campsite discussion, which means no one's around. And we can just share our true feelings of where we're at. And we know that we won't be judged and that we can be real with one another. And I think everybody needs that kind of a friend.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Are you ready for the rapid fire questions?
I guess we'll just go.
These are fun.
Okay.
One of them serious.
Dennis, what's your favorite meal to eat out?
Oh, absolutely pizza. I could eat pizza every day of the week.
And what's your favorite pizza place?
Right now, it's La Rosa's, of all places. Although I have to admit, growing up and for my hometown friends, Edinetto's would be certainly up there, maybe second. That's a local pizza place on Maple Avenue in Zanesville.
What do people misunderstand about you?
What do people misunderstand about me? Well, in my role today, I think some would think I'm always serious, always intense and pushing. But there's a time where I just want to, watch a movie or relax and get away even from church issues. Another thing is that people may not know about me. You may know, Tim, especially we work together, but I still get very nervous speaking. Now, I've been a pastor for 30 years, and I've preached to 5,000 and 5,000 people in different times, but I still almost every time get nervous. A nervous way that I don't want to do it. It's just that those butterflies come. And in some ways, though, I think it's been helpful for me. It's kept me humble. It's kept me on edge. And so that's part of who I am, a little bit about me that people may not know.
So during this pandemic, I'm assuming the pandemic, what Netflix series, movie, or TV show have you binge watched lately?
Sure. Well, we don't have at our house Netflix, but I confess, maybe this will change your image of me, that I am a Hallmark movie fanatic. So I've watched a lot of Hallmark romantic cheesy movies over the past year. Well, it's a good way to pass 2 hours.
There are a lot of closet Hallmark people.
Yeah.
What are you reading?
I'm in the middle, probably 3/4 the way through, of Neil Peart's Ghostwriter, which is he calls it journey, or on the healing road. Neil was the former drummer of Rush, and he lost his wife and his daughter tragically. So it's just his journey. It's part of a travel log, but it's also his journey of healing in the midst of grief. It's a very large book, but it's been very rich, and I've enjoyed working through it.
So what brings you joy these days?
Well, right now it's spending time with Rachel. We're both into fitness. She's been in fitness for a long time, and so we're spending a lot of time together with that, and hopefully getting healthier, but also spending time together in our relationship, and that's the source of my joy.
Well, truly, thank you, Dennis.
Thank you.
We appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to be with us and to share with us the relationships that are important to you. And reminding us of those open road moments that invite us into new relationship as well. So thank you for your time and your stories and your wisdom. Any last minute words of wisdom that you want to offer to folks, Dennis, either about leadership, about courage, about relationships?
I'd like to just say to the listeners what I've already said, to never do ministry alone. Just be reminded that no person is an island. Grab another hand and link arms and do life together. As they say, which seems corny, but yet it's true, teamwork makes the dream work. But we were created to do life together. And also that's where the fun begins. So have fun with each other.
That's a good word.
All I want to say, Dennis, I appreciate you giving us some time today, and that I'm grateful for who you are and for your ministry, for your openness to God, and the way you embrace me and so many others in and through you. It's been a pleasure to be with you today. I'm grateful.
Likewise. Thank you.
So, how are you doing with the relationships that Dennis named? Yes, I'm really asking you. Here are your questions to consider for this week. On a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being poor and 5 being outstanding, how's your relationship with the following people? First, Jesus. On a scale of 1 to 5, how you doing? If you're married, how's your relationship with your spouse? Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, how are you doing? What about family? Friends and colleagues? And then what about your mentors? So the 5 relationship groups that I just named are Jesus, your spouse, family, friends and colleagues, and then mentors. The second question for you this week is, how are you nurturing relationships with people beyond the church? And finally, these last 2 questions are really to help you integrate what you've heard throughout this entire month. What have you learned about yourself and your relationships throughout this month? And then last but not least, what one action will you take to continue to grow as a courageous leader and nurture your relationships? As a reminder, you can find show notes for this episode, including the questions that I just gave you, at transformingmission.org/podcast. You can also go directly to this episode at transformingmission.org/166. And remember, who you are is how you lead. Bye for now.